Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Weiser. I'm president of the Saline Area Chamber of Commerce, and Frank Hampton, our chairman, could not be here today. He's at a state tennis meet. His son is playing for a state championship with Central High School. So I guess you're stuck with me this morning. So please be patient, be kind, and no booing or whatever. But I want to welcome our legislators today. Why don't we all stand and pledge allegiance to the flag, okay? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I would like to say that these meetings are hosted by the Chamber and they are sponsored by AT&T. And here this morning representing AT&T is Katie Copal. Katie drove all the way from Topeka in driving rain to be with us this morning. So Katie, we do appreciate AT&T's support of these legislative issue meetings. And so just relax, have a donut, and enjoy. Would like to introduce our legislators that are here this morning. We have off to my left is our Senator Tom Arbke, representing the 24th District. Next to him is Diana Dirks, Representative Dirks, representing the 71st District. And next to Diana, Representative Stephen Johnson, representing the 108th District. So welcome, legislators. We're glad to have you here. JR had another commitment and could not be here this morning. But I think we caught you guys just at the right time, a little adjournment so that you go back Monday. And I know you're busy and I appreciate you being here today. Again, the format of the meetings, we're going to have some opening remarks from each of our legislators. And I think I'm going to change the format and go back to what we're doing. We have a smaller crowd. Last time, for those of you that weren't here, we wrote down the questions and rather than come up and ask the questions. And that worked really well. We had a larger crowd. I think what I'm going to do, and the legislators have agreed to that, after their opening remarks, I think if you have a question, if you would just come up here to the front, state your name, the legislator that you want to have answer that question, and then state the question. And please state the question, and let's not go on for 5 minutes about your opinion or any background, and I might have to interrupt you if you do. So with that, I think Senator Arbke, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Don. Thank you for coming this morning. We thank the Chamber and AT&T. This is always an interesting legislative format when we haven't finished up the session yet. A little disappointing to me. We're scheduled to do 90 days. Last year we did it in 78 and finished up early, saved the state some money, which is part of the Republican platform. Smaller government, less taxes, do things efficiently. We seem to have had some interesting little dust-ups over the last couple weeks. We had one with Uber. If you're not familiar with Uber, Uber's a entrepreneurial taxi type service where you can download an application on your iPhone or similar device. You can pull up the drivers that are in the area and you can look at the type of vehicle they have and select that and they'll come and pick you up. Well, we couldn't come to an agreement with how the insurance should be handled and specifically with liens that were still on the car. The car's not paid for and the bankers, so the insurance and the bankers got together and had some proposals that we actually discussed on the floor, and we didn't really come to agreement, and the governor's veto on that was overridden by actually a constitutional majority in both the House and the Senate. Pretty significant override of the governor's veto. Immediately, Uber pulled out and said, we'll never do business again in Kansas, and I'm president of a group called CLEAR, which looks at legislative issues and kind of ranks the bills. And so I sent Andrew an email. I said, well, what's happening here? I thought this was something that you wanted to do, and we were going to come to an agreement with the legislation that we had discussed. And he sent me an email back and said, well, you guys are not willing to negotiate, and we're done. So he immediately let all 800 drivers go, told them they were no longer able to pick up rides. That was probably not a very good PR part on his part with some of his independent contractors that drive in the Kansas City area. Well, they decided they actually wanted to do business here in Kansas and came back and negotiated with the Legislative Insurance Committee that was looking at these issues, and we should have something announced here pretty quick. I know they had a press conference on Friday talking about that. The other little dust-up we had was on a small bill called Uncork Kansas, which was on the distribution of alcohol in the state. Was it going to be continued by privates, or were we going to let the big box stores, the Walmarts, Dillons, Sam's type businesses have the ability to sell beer, wine, and spirits? This is the 15th year that we've had this discussion. It's not a new issue, and it was not a popular thing to discuss. We really think they overplayed their hand in my mind. We thought there was a lot of pressure put on senators in meetings that we had in our offices, and if you looked at the vote that was taken in the Senate, it was 26-11 not to move that bill forward. So pretty decisive, and the interesting thing, we had both rural and communities, large communities like Kansas City, voting on both sides of the issue. So it really wasn't a rural city type issue. It was really about, do we want to continue with small mom and pop, privately owned businesses distributing alcohol here in the state? Other than that, I haven't had any committee meetings. Education has not met. Natural Resources has not met. General Government has not met. Ways and Means has, and these meetings have been to clean up some issues that bills that we passed earlier in the session. One of these was over some of the inequity of the block grant at our military bases, specifically Fort Leavenworth and the one that is in Junction City, Fort Riley. Last year they had gotten an extraordinary federal grant, which was actually catching up some of the funding that they share with the state. The military bases do not have a tax levy on the houses there, so there's no dollars collected from the students that live on base and go to the schools. So that difference was about $3 million for fiscal year 16 and 17 that we needed to catch up. I don't know what the exact division is between the two bases, but we were able to do that for them and get the full funding they need for their students for this year. So those are really the three things that the Senate has actually had a floor vote on, move forward, and that's about all we've done. And I'll probably cover some of those other issues. You ask why we're not done yet when you have those types of questions. Thank you, Don. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, everyone. I know it's a little rainy day today, but those of you who are interested in how government works, you're here, and I really appreciate that and applaud you all. Thank you to AT&T and the Chamber for inviting us again. It's always nice to be home. Get home and not have to be in that hotel room, but it's an adventure, needless to say. Sitting in on the House floor with my colleagues and making laws is something that every citizen should be able to do. We have laws that are coming down now that are going to help people who live in our community. One of which is it's called the Otis Law. I really can't remember the number of the bill, but it was the Otis Law. And this impacted one of our citizens, actually our county treasurer, whose grandson suffers from seizures. They came to visit us at the house, at the State House, and came into my office, and the wife was holding the child, and this child was having seizures every minute, just one right after another, uncontrollably. And a bill was written and brought to the House that would encourage being able to use what's called hemp oil. It is not medicinal marijuana, it is hemp oil, which used can help in some instances control some of these seizures, not only from the seizures that Otis has, but also those epileptic seizures that some people have. It was naturally at some point a little controversial, but it was something that needed to be done. And I'm very happy to tell you that that did pass out of the House. I was going to ask the senator how it did in the Senate or if it's even been brought before you, but it was something that needed to be done. So that was one bill that realistically is something I'm kind of proud that I voted yes on. Other bills naturally are the tax, but I'm going to let Representative Johnson, who's very knowledgeable about the tax situation, I can give you comments at some point as to how it's going to affect you, our constituents, but the number person is sitting directly to my left, and I'm certainly going to let him handle that. To tell you how long we're going to be there, I honestly can't tell you. It's just going to be at the point to where we can come up with a tax bill that hopefully will benefit instead of take away from our constituencies. So I am going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Representative Johnson, I'm sure who has numerous things to say.
Thank you, Representative Dirks. I'll try and limit it from being too numerous and look forward to your questions. But great to be here. Thanks to the Chamber and AT&T and to all of you. Actually, each of the people in this room are key to this process. I'll mention just, I think everybody knows Don pretty well, but we are lucky to have him here. And that coordination and getting us all together doesn't just happen, but it's him. And I appreciate that. And our AT&T representative, they have a lot of talented people there, but we have been fortunate to work with her for a while in previous capacities when she ran our majority leader's office on the House side and then the Senate Vice President's office on the Senate side in the past. So she is very familiar with the process and not only helping things work, but making them work in that process. So thanks to both of them for being here. Issues that I'm working on, and we'll turn to your questions, the committees that I have been meeting in tax and pensions, and then another issue, Representative Dirks mentioned the issues that related to opportunities with hemp. A couple of things passed, which I think are good things. One, she mentioned Otis's Law, which I think had 80-some votes in the House. From there, it went to the conference committee, and I don't think it's gone anywhere in conference committee, so I don't think the Senate has had a chance to look at it. I think it's been tied up there, and I'm not sure it's actually going to make it out of there. They have looked at splitting it apart. One of the things that happened to pass, there was a law that was on changing the sentencing for first time and I believe second time possession of marijuana so that it did not require jail time. And I may be a little foggy on exactly what that is, because I don't understand all of the sentencing things, but that was the bill that came up. And then these other two measures, one being the ability to use hemp oil and the ability to research hemp at our, through the Kansas Department of Agriculture, which is now allowed in the last Farm Bill, were amended onto that. So a chance to look at both benefits to people and possible benefits to the economy working through there. I believe the Ag one is now in conference in the Ag Committee, and I'm not sure that the others have moved out of the Judicial Committee, which was dealing with the overall bill. So that's probably plenty of detail on that one. The other items, of course, pensions have continued to work. We should be getting some good news on pensions again each July meeting. Right now they're calculating the numbers from the last year, and based on the previous market performance, there will be more positive returns added in there, and we should look slightly better as we look at our overall funding on that. The pension bond should help with that further. We are anxiously looking forward to whether we are able to issue that bond. There is a 5% cap on the cumulative interest and expense. Interest rates moved fairly dramatically about a week ago. They seem to be edging back down. Assuming we stay under that 5%, that was the number we were comfortable with that we could beat with a high degree of safety. That will help additionally. We will know that probably in late July, exactly what is able to happen there. That measure has fully passed and been signed by the governor. We also have been working for the last 3 years since the last sunset on working after retirement for school licensed personnel. There is a bill that just recently has now passed as of yesterday through the conference committee process that provides what we hope might be a long-term solution. The current policy that we have allows great flexibility for folks to return after retirement, but actually would provide an incentive to retire early and take both my pension and continue to work financially, which is in conflict with our IRS laws that expressly prohibit any prearrangement. And as we look at what's happened in our retirement age, that's changed quite a bit. The new policy would allow anyone at any time to return to work, but their CAPERS payment would be suspended at that point until they then again retired. That allows some flexibility, but it puts all of the onus on the employer to bear the cost to attract someone back rather than sharing it with the CAPERS system. Given that there are some issues with that, also there are a series of exceptions to enable somebody to be brought back, because invariably our talented pool of retired employees are those that we need to tap at least in an emergency, if not other situations. So there are 3 windows that deal with that, and I'm thrilled to talk about that further if anyone wishes. And then tax is the main one that has been meeting and meeting and meeting. On both the House and Senate side, I would say the Senate has had some more unusual proposals on taxation. And as such has had more of a challenge coming to a consensus, and so far I don't know that there is anything that has been proposed as an overall plan. Certainly a number of ideas that are there. The House has struggled with that also. There have been a number of plans assembled, and I have a stack of papers that look something like this, how people want to put different pieces together from the various building blocks of what raises revenue, from income to sales to gas to cigarettes to anything else you can imagine. The only thing I can tell you is there is no property tax item on the list that we have been working from, but a number of other things in terms of rates and how they're put together. The next challenge is how you come to a consensus on that, and that's what we'll be working through. I'll be happy to chat about any of those pieces that are there. Our chair of the tax committee decided to get one idea out there. I would say the group that's more to the right politically has wanted to focus on sales tax and avoid the income tax changes. Their idea was floated first. It did not pass yesterday. The reality is, I'm not sure any idea passes first, second, or maybe even third. But what we may find is what different groups are there, what votes are for those pieces, and how we put a final package together. I expect the next one, we meet at 1:30 on Monday. I expect us to go back to what was proposed as the global solution. It changes the tax where all businesses would pay tax at a 2.7 rate. It does use sales tax in various measures and gets us about $400+ million in revenue, which gives us roughly a $100 million ending balance. My guess is the ending balance winds up a little lower than that, and I'm not sure where all the revenue comes from, but I'll be glad to address questions as they're appropriate, and I thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead now, and once again, I'm breaking from our format from last time. So please, anybody with a question, why don't you come forward, state your name, state the legislator that you would like to have answer that question, and please make it a question. I don't want to embarrass anyone and have to interrupt you to ask the question, so please adhere to those rules. Come up, ask your question, and we'll take as many as time will allow. Who's got the first question? Bill, you certainly have a question, don't you?
Thank you for being here. I'm Karen Shade. Last year there was a rush to complete legislation and a midnight session and a lot of public outcry. What processes are in place that you're observing right now that will result in what kind of outcome, I guess is what I'm asking. What can we expect as the process from here down?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll take a shot at it, and others can add in. We have not had the late nights of other years. And on the House side, we have not had the number of bills brought above the line by our leadership, which has changed that agenda. One thing that will change our process from previous years is there was a new rule passed this year by the House that says we can't go past midnight. We can vote to go past midnight, but we adjourn at that time, and if we're up against it, and it's very possible, let's say we're in the middle of a debate that we really want to finish, I think it's possible that a majority would vote to extend that deadline and say, we're going to continue debate for an hour or 45 minutes. But at least it will change that process of just pushing it through and having that endless session of whatever would manage to come up. I think that will be a good change. We will learn. It may or may not prohibit the rushed piece at the end. As the time comes down and folks are trying to figure out, okay, will this work? It, at least on the House side, becomes a process of us talking to each other and saying, okay, how do you understand this? Does this have a real problem? Do you think we can live with this? And sometimes you do find out that there's a missed element, et cetera, that is in there. But I think that rule will at least help the midnight part of it and give us maybe a little more civil approach to that schedule. So I don't know if that was all of your question, but thank you for the question.
The Senate has a separate set of rules, and then we have a set of what we call joint rules. So the Senate and the House agree that some of the things will overlap, and those really come about at this time of the year. So some of the times we have to suspend the rules to bring what we call bills above the line. And if you don't have 24 hours notice, you can't work the bill. But if you, in the Senate, it's Rule K, you can let the Senate debate the bill and have a vote on it. So we're at that point in the session where we have a bill come out of committee. We do want to have the debate on the floor. The committee has passed it out, sometimes with a recommendation to pass favorably, and sometimes it comes out of the committee with no recommendation. Those are the ones you want to pay attention to because they didn't have consensus on the committee that this was something that was, they felt best for the state of Kansas. And that's where we are in our particular tax committee. We've only had actually one bill come out recently. It was the tax amnesty plan. It was about a $30 million, if people will pay their taxes, gain to the bottom line with no penalties. In other words, they're not going to add back taxes. They're not going to add interest. You pay your taxes. We just want to be able to collect that. The other part of the rules for the Senate, we don't have a time limit. And sometimes, based on which year it is, the first year of the biennium or the second, the Senate is in the lead to adjourn, or the Senate is in lead to propose certain types of actions. This year, the House goes first, so even if the House doesn't go past midnight, doesn't adjourn, we'll have to wait till the next day then. But if we were handling that part of it, we could adjourn and send it over to the House if they wanted to wait for that bill and then adjourn. So that's called a concurrent resolution, where we both houses have to approve that. So our tax committee is meeting briefly. There is some very controversial proposals. One is the $3 excise tax per acre across the state. I'm not actually sure how that would work. That would raise about $150 million. I don't know if that's worth doing that to upset that many people in the rural part of the state. It gets brought up almost every tax meeting, but I haven't seen it move forward or bundled in anything else. So until we have a tax committee meeting where we can decide the 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 things that we want to put into a bill to discuss on the floor. We haven't had anything to work on in the Senate yet, so we're actually waiting on our tax committee to pass something out and bring to the floor.
House members have been a little frustrated that we haven't been able to get going, as we say. There have been limited bills that have not come before the line. Bills that I think that are important, that should be debated, talked about, but for some reason leadership has chosen not to bring them above the line for us to debate. As far as the midnight hour, I really feel that at that point, people start to feel a little frustrated and tired, and you've been at it all day long. Maybe not the cohesive environment that you would like to see to make sound decisions. So I think that's one of the reasons why the 12 o'clock midnight striking magic hour. Personally, I understand that we want to get things done in the 90-day time frame, but when you're working on pieces of legislation that's going to have an impact on your constituents, it's not going to hurt us to have to stay there until we iron it out and get a proper bill passed. And there are so many elements when you're looking at shortfall in revenues, bills that have to be paid. It's not something that's going to be a simplistic decision that you're going to be able to go home that night and say, oh, well, we can do without that. No, there are cuts to education, cuts to other entities, and we need to make sure that our children have the proper education and the funding is available. Where those tax dollars are going to come from, we're going to have to figure it out. I am, for one reason, I look at the consequences and the benefits. And at the midnight hour, oftentimes, you might miss some of those. So bear with us. We will work on a tax plan, and hopefully it will meet most of what you would like to see in a tax plan. But also, if we have to make a decision, it's because it will eventually benefit all of you. Thank you.
Question?
I just have a question about the taxes and the fact that there's not enough money. And if you look back in the past and there was enough money, it doesn't make sense, but possibly it is a bad idea to cut the taxes. Does this not make sense? Perhaps we should backtrack and make Kansas like it was previously. Schools close before they have to. Having superintendents retire before they want to because they're simply tired of the houses. I think something, looking backwards to see perhaps a mistake was made and recognition of a mistake and making it right again.
In case you couldn't hear in the back, the question was, if we have a shortfall in revenue and we're not going to cut things, why aren't we increasing our tax base or spreading it out? Why don't we go back to what we had before? Is that pretty much it? Well, that's a very interesting question, very intuitive. However, I can tell you that over all government agencies, we have a 2 to 5% creep every year. And I actually had a substitute bill this year that would hold the spending to 2015 levels. So whatever we spent this fiscal year would then be the budget for 2016 and 2017. And without having to do anything and just holding that flat, in 2016 we would have had a $98 million positive ending balance. And in 2017 we would have had a $107 million positive ending balance. So it's not that we're not looking at cuts or needing increases. It's that if we don't look at our agencies and be efficient with the dollars that we've got, and by the way, we brought in $500 million more dollars this year than last year. So there was more money brought in from tax receipts, those types of things, mill levies, because we did have certain areas of the state where their valuations of their property went up, and so we received more dollars on that 20 mil statewide levy that goes to the schools. So it's a very complicated thing, and there's a lot of pieces and parts that go into putting our budget together. So as Representative Johnson said, yes, the tax base that we have, which is our mill levy, property taxes, is a key component. And sometimes we use our sales tax to make that up. We also have a gas tax. We also have oil and gas lease taxes that we bring in. So there's lots of taxes that are out there. And if you looked at the exemptions that we've offered over the last decades, the actual total is $6 billion with a B. But some of those property taxes are exemptions on government buildings, so we don't want to tax ourselves on those. However, we've offered a lot of other exemptions that have never had a sunset and probably need to be looked at again. There's really not a mechanism to do that. So one of the proposals that's been discussed and not brought forward out of the tax committee would be to remove all the tax exemptions on a very small portion of those pieces. It'd raise about $290 million, and part of that would be some policy pieces with that. You could come and reapply for that exemption for a 1, 2, or 3-year period, and you could renew it one time. And some of the other parts that go with that would be if there is a non-government entity that can provide that service without getting the tax exemption, let's do it. If there's not, well, maybe you deserve to have that exemption. Like I could think of our food bank. That's one thing that no one else is doing here in Salina. They probably deserve to have that tax exemption on their property there. So, yeah, there's just all lots of things, but I think we need to look at all of them and kind of start over again. So I do think there's enough dollars. I just don't think we've been very accountable with how we spend those. And one thing I did bring today was, as chairman of the Education Budget Committee, we've never done this before. So we put together data books. You can look at the technical college data books. So you can compare Salina with Washburn and the other ones in the state. We can look at the community colleges and how they are performing. We can look at their graduation rates. And one thing I asked them to do was, well, how long does it take our students to complete the degree program that they signed up for? So there's a section here that says 100%, 150%, 200%. Well, 100% means they graduate with that degree program in 1 year, if it's a 1-year program. If it takes them 2 years, it's 150%. If it takes them 3 years, it's 200%. So you can look at all the degree programs that they offer and how long it takes them to complete that and get into the marketplace and earn a living wage. The other one that we've done is a state university data book. And so you can look at the student populations, you can look at the number of professors, you can look at the unclassified employees, you can look at the test scores that our average freshman incoming into the university has. You can then look at those scores, and if they're able to graduate in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, I almost hate to say 7 years, 8 years. Yes, we track those students up to 8 years to see if they graduate. Unfortunately, at 8 years, we still have about 2% of that student population that started 8 years ago that still doesn't have a degree and they're still in school. That's got to be a very expensive proposition. So if the press would like these, or if other stations, this is a very useful thing. This is something that the Board of Regents puts together. Their research staff is unbelievably fantastic. And I really rely on them helping out to help us get the data to make decisions when we spend. In this particular case, the universities are about 10 to 11% of our total state budget, and K through 12 is about 51%. So between the two of them, it's between 62 and 64% of our total state budget that we spend on education here in the state. So I hope that answers your question. It's not an easy yes, up, down, no. There's so many moving parts in terms of revenue, expenses, how we allocate those to the different agencies, and how efficient they're running. So that's sometimes why we need to review and make sure that we're spending the taxpayers' dollars as efficiently as possible, so you get the services that we need to provide our citizens here in Kansas.
I have a list here of the itemized deductions currently included in the Kansas itemized deduction. Something that is included in the tax bill that was defeated on the floor, but it did retain the personal property taxes, the home mortgage interest, charitable contributions. But in looking at this list, and it's quite lengthy, my eye was kind of drawn to the very last one here, and something that I think when the tax committee meets again, that maybe we still have to tweak some of those deductions. One of which was you would no longer, in this tax bill that was proposed, to deduct impairment-related work expenses of a disabled person. Now, what that covers, I don't know. That's the only thing that's on here. I would have to look at it. But to me, that just kind of drew my attention that maybe we need to really itemize and look at some of these and incorporate some of them into it. I'm looking at somebody using an example. They have to have a motorized wheelchair. The cost of that, if they're having to pay for it themselves and not getting some type of assistance, that to me should be able to be exempt. Now, I understand that statistics say that probably only 20% of the taxpayers really itemize. They just do a flat form. But there are some that do. And I think we need to look at those pieces and look at all of the pieces when they construct another tax idea and tax committee. That would be my personal thoughts.
And I think this is the question that's right central to what we're talking about. But you've heard, I don't want to belabor anything. If we need to get on to more questions, I have a ton to say, but I'm happy to limit that. You want me to take a few minutes, or do you want to move on to the next topic? Take a few? Okay. This is huge, and I've been trying to figure out where we are on tax and spending piece. So a moment of philosophy and then into the numbers. What I recognize is that none of us has a complete and clear picture of what this thing is. At best, my experience is incomplete to know everything that is there. And secondly, there is a clouded lens of ideology where my beliefs are going to be somewhat different than Representative Dirks or Senator Arpke. So each of us has a perspective, both of which are just important to recognize. There's not a right or wrong in that, but how do we come to it? So as I approach the problem, I am looking at the tax side, and I'm lucky to sit behind Representative Ron Reichman Jr., who's our appropriations chair. And he is very talented, very bright. And my question to him is, what's the number? What do I have to come up with? And Senator Arpke is working on that side as well. What is the number? Then from that, how do I drive the revenue to equal whatever that number is? So I'm looking at a more limited part of that particular piece. Next, I was very suspect of all of the numbers I was getting, based both on whether the numbers were complete and whether or not they had a spin or an ideology behind what they wanted me to draw from the numbers. So I have spent a lot of time trying to study through this and figure out what does that look like. So there's two things here. One is the completeness. One is the economics of what drives growth. And one is the ideology of what collectively we want to do. And I think all of those are relevant as we put the tax package together. So I was suspect that income taxes drove growth in the degree that I was hearing. And only yesterday, I finally gave up. I went to my mentor and I said, here's all the data. I'm trying to get through it. And we ran through a bunch of numbers, and sure enough, The best relationship I can find, and there's no perfect relationship in numbers, but the best predictive relationship I can find between policy and economic growth relates to income tax. Higher or lower tax does have a lot of predictive value. If you look at it gross, if you look at it per capita, a number of things. Sales tax has some, but it is not as clear. So if I want growth, over time, it does appear that income tax is the biggest lever. So I want to be sensitive to that because I do want growth. However, is growth the only thing that I want? I think that there also, as I bump into people anecdotally, a sense, and fair is often disparaged as a term to use because we can't agree on what's fair, but where do we want that load to be borne? And I think there's been a sense that by focusing on growth, we are giving those with money a free ride. I think that could be claimed also. So then you look at, okay, collectively, where do we want that balance? And how do we try to get there? So my sense, and it's only anecdotal, but my sense is that most citizens and even most business owners feel that business owners should pay some tax. That's my sense. And I will assure you there are at least 124 different opinions of where that comes out just in the House, right? But I will argue that sense, as other people will argue their sense of where it comes out to try and figure it out. The global proposals do have some return of business. It's been as low as 2.5. It's been as high as the full income rate. We'll still be trying to figure out what that is. Will it pass? Then you get into the politics of how that whole thing works. So if I am in, I'm willing to vote for that, and generally the folks who are going to vote for the business tax are where I am and to the left. And generally those that are going to focus on growth are where I am and to the right. And they clearly overlap. But who is able to vote for the tax impact? What are all the political ramifications? And how does that come out? Nobody has the answer to that yet. I think our tax chair played it wisely as he went through and said, okay, we've got to get one of these ideas out. We did not call a division vote in committee. I'm not sure it actually passed in committee, but the chair called it passed so we could have the discussion on the floor. And he suggested, you know, let's not belabor this or call division votes. Let's get something out. We're going to just pass it without recommendation so we can have the debate. I was a little nervous about that to start with, but I think it was the right approach. And I'm not sure if that's 3 more times that happens. If it's 1 more time, that'd be awesome, and we'd be done by Thursday. That's probably a little too idealistic as we go through it. But there's a lot that goes into it beyond the perspective that each of us has. I hope that helps some. My hope is that we have, I believe, a very low tax, and the 2.7% has a chance of passing. There's a lot of opposition to that. Even among us, we'll disagree on that. I don't think that it would abruptly halt growth. I think it would still be supportive of growth. I know it changes messages to the business community. I want to be sensitive to that. But I also want to be sensitive to what I think most people say, how they would like to pay taxes, and put that. Oh, the other key thing to that, the volatility of the streams. It is amazing. The volatility of revenue from income tax is over twice that from sales tax. And it really doesn't offset. I thought, well, it saves us some years. And I ran through it, and I discovered it really doesn't. It just adds a lot of volatility. So if I were agnostic, and I'm not, I'd say, well, I do prefer sales tax. It's a lot more stable, predictable revenue stream, et cetera. One thing that has been added in on the House side, and it's very modest, but I think it's directionally correct. The current proposals and the one that came out cuts the sales tax on food to 5.9 from 6.15. So at least it's a token in the right direction, and it's not increasing it on that end. And then it increases the sales tax to whatever it has to be to fill the gap. The worst number I've seen is 7.15, a full 1% increase. I think it's going to wind up around 6.5 or higher. I have said that I couldn't go above 6.5, and I'll probably have to eat those words. But we'll see how we put all the pieces together. Thanks for indulging me that time.
For that. Next question. I think that gentleman had one. Go ahead.
I'm Greg Stevens, 842 South 10th, and my question relates to House Bill 2391, which involves civil service protection for public workers. And I'm concerned about it because public workers that do regulatory work, I think, need civil service protection. But further, is it true that there's a chance that we could lose federal funding of $100 to $150 million? And how does that play into this bill that's proposed?
The Senate hasn't looked at that. I haven't had it discussed. It hasn't been even rumored. I don't know where you got that information. Yeah, I'm not sure where Steve?
I don't, and if we got the Wi-Fi, I'd look up where it is in the process. But I don't know. So
Yeah.
if we could follow up with you later, I'd be glad to.
Right, we'd be
Sorry
happy to
not
do
have-
that. You stumped us.
My question, excuse me, is to follow up on that because I read recently that that bill was signed into law by Governor Brownback on Thursday. And so what I wanted to ask is, of each of you, is how does eliminating civil service play into your vision for the state of Kansas?
Well, if we could actually have a discussion a bit, I would love to hear more of your concern, because I remember having a discussion about that earlier in the session, and it must have been during the general session that we talked about that one. But what all impacts are in there that are going to happen? So I don't know the committee that it came out of to know where to follow up more. But again, if I can give you cards or catch that, I'm glad to find out more. And I'd like to know what you see that is going to be eliminated and hurt by that. So we can at least start what we'd need to for the next session.
Are there any more questions before you respond? And then you can, if let's get as many questions in as we can. Gentleman back there.
Gary Waldron, what are you guys doing to help the DOC in the way of keeping staff members? Because I know there are some people that have not had raises for over 8 years, 10 years. What are you guys doing in the way of keeping Kansas, because right now, if you look at the 14 states that are kind of in the region Kansas is at the bottom, that we're paying our correctional workers and stuff. What are you guys doing in your up there to help improve that, to offer better wages and stuff so we can hold on to people that are doing those jobs?
Last year, as part of our ending discussion on literally getting out of the session, there was a filibuster, and this is how we do the filibuster in the Senate. If you don't have enough people to pass the vote, some other senators leave the chamber and can't be found to vote. And so then your phone starts ringing, and the governor calls you, and the Senate president. And so the person that did that last year was Senator Steve Fitzgerald, and specifically to get more dollars for the Department of Corrections. And that was put on in the Senate. So we are well aware of what needs to happen there, and I think we're trying to help you guys out to get raises. Where that is this year, since I don't sit on that committee, and it wasn't part of the review of the budget of the general government that I looked at, if you'd write me a letter, I'd be happy to move that forward. So send me a letter, state what you need, and I'll get you an answer.
Part of which, a lot of it just comes down to funding, where the dollars are, and what we can put into a budget and where the money can be allocated. And at this point, without a tax bill, and we know where the revenue is and what sources, and that revenue stream is continuous enough to be able to do that. If their dollars are there, it needs to be done. So hopefully we're able to find that.
Comments? Okay. Another question?
Okay, Don, since you threw down the gauntlet here. All right.
I knew you had a question, Bill.
I just could not resist. I couldn't resist. But Representative Johnson, first of all, I absolutely appreciate the 5 minutes. It's just they're explaining what's happening in terms of the tax and spending philosophy in the legislature, because that went a long way toward helping me understand a lot of the politics involved with what's happening in Topeka right now. I guess what I would like to find out from each of you, and this is a very difficult question, so if you could in some way shed some light on where you might stand on this, is where each of you stand with respect to rolling back some of the income tax cuts that were put in place 2 years ago, and also where you stand in terms of sales tax increases. And you kind of touched on that already, Representative Johnson. I guess I'd like to hear from Representative Dirks as well as Senator Arpke on both of those issues as well. And then the other issue is the block grant legislation that was approved, Senate Bill 7, less than 60 days ago, has already had a proposal submitted to cut that even further. Another $30.5 million cut on the block grant legislation that I believe was proposed out of committee. So do you see this also, the block grant legislation that was recently adopted by the legislature, being impacted further, being cut further?
Well, I'll dispel that rumor. There's absolutely no cut to the block grant. That has not been discussed in Ways and Means. There is no cut. Let's talk about the income tax and where we stand in, I think, both chambers. Even if we did change that, I am positive, I haven't talked to the governor, but I am positive he would veto that. It takes a constitutional majority in both houses to override the veto. It won't happen. So even if we did have something come out of each chamber and agreed on it in our conference committees, and that's a really big if, because the governor has really taken a hard stance on this, I think it would be vetoed. In terms of sales tax increases, whether it be a gas tax or just a regular consumption tax, if it's just a vote up or down on the tax without policy included, you're not going to get my vote. I think we've done enough of those in the past, and it has not had the benefit that we've done here in Salina, where we've passed a ½ sales tax for the technical school and for some other innovative things we did for computers and those types of upgrades, where we could actually see the benefit of that ½ sales tax and had a sunset on it. I think the citizens of Saline and Saline County continue to approve that because it had a direct impact locally. We could see the benefit. It did help our teachers. It did help our students. It did help our facility. So when you add that policy, I think it makes it a benefit instead of just another tax. I was part of a sponsor of a group of people in the House that wanted to remove food sales tax completely. And when I lived in Nebraska, I was part of that group up there too, and they did get it passed. It took 12 years, but it did pass. And I think we've just started that discussion here seriously probably in the last 3 or 4 years. And I do think that's a benefit to every family. Everybody buys food. And it'll be just for unprepared food like they did in Nebraska. So if you go buy a candy bar, you're going to pay tax. If you go to a restaurant, it's prepared, you're you're going to pay tax. You go to McDonald's, you're going to pay tax. So it's just for unprepared groceries that you would buy to prepare a meal at your house. Bill, did that cover pretty much everything? Thanks for asking the question. As chairman of the Education Budget Committee, my answer is no. I am not willing to cut that. I think we've done the right thing. With our innovative school districts, we've had significant discussion on a new formula. They were willing to use that new formula for a year. It didn't get passed yet. I'm not sure where it's at. And really be a guinea pig. Does this work? Are the outcomes that we're looking at beneficial to you as an administrator, looking over those dollars, managing your workforce, and making sure our students get the education that we promised them? And so I was very disappointed that we couldn't move forward with those 6 school districts that really stepped up to the plate and volunteered to do that in their school districts. We're going to have to do something different in the future, and it's important that we have the Board of Education buy into that, and they did. They had been at all the meetings that we had over the summer to discuss that. We met at several different service centers where people were able to come in and have that discussion. So we had a couple dozen principals. We had multiple school districts that were not innovative school districts involved in that. So we really tried to get a lot of input before Steve had that bill drafted to have the discussion in the Education Committee. And it's something that we still need more input on, but I sure would have liked to have gotten that feedback from a year's practical application of that new finance formula.
Finance formula is the number on the top of my list. The block grant, in answer to your question, Superintendent Hall, as far as the block grant, when that was passed, there was an amendment that was defeated that would make it that the governor and leadership would not be able to pull allotments out of the block grant. I'm really skeptical of that. Giving you a classic example, look what's happened to KDOT. I've been visiting with members of the KDOT committees and the road workers, and I have a whole list here of what is being, here over $1 million a day is being diverted from KDOT. $2.1 million has been transferred from the lifetime of T-Works. $246 million in reduced lettings for construction projects for 2016. $90 million worth of work postponed in April this year. Folks, the kind of weather we're having now, our roads are not going to be able to be maintained, and the money has to come from somewhere. So I am in disagreement with my colleague that I still believe that the block grants could be very vulnerable to have money. If we have no money, the money has to come from somewhere, and they're going to be looking at all avenues. I'd be interested in knowing what the new finance formula is going to be looking at like, and how that's going to be affecting those who are involved in education. We're not soothsayers. We can't look into the future. But at the same time, if you look at the elements that are being compiled and pieces that are coming out in the tax proposals and the revenue sources that were still pure, often very number of them are pure speculation, we're hoping that we're going to get $60 million from the MCO fees. We're hoping that the amnesty is not more than $30 million. We're looking at all points, and I sit in on the tax committee. I'm certainly not a member, and I would not be even envious of Representative Johnson to have that position. But just picking up the bits and pieces that I've been able to ascertain, we are still hurting. And as far as the corporate, the tax cuts in 2012, you have to look at it. I've been a big advocate for going back and at least revisiting that. But if the proposal that was made would make it that they would have 2.7 or 2.5 added taxes, but it would be retroactive to January. And a lot of our small corporations and communities, LLCs, already have their budget planned, their revenue sources, their outgo. So to be making it retroactive would be something that would be hurtful to those who, they didn't ask for the tax cut, but now they have to deal with what would happen if they were reinstated. The problem is that when the first bill in 2012, where they came up with that tax plan that gave LLCs a break, again, it was one of those, it was hurried. Maybe not all the consequences were looked at. And now we can't do the same thing if you wanted to repeal it. You have to say, what are the consequences? Let's do this incrementally. Can never pronounce that word. You know what I mean? That it would make it over a period of time so they would have an opportunity to do some planning. The schools, in answer to Superintendent Hall, the schools have to make their plan. And right now, with the block grant, not knowing what the finance formula is going to be, has put our education system in a quandary. And it's not something that we're going to be able to work fast at. We have to slow the process down, look at it, but make sure that those monies are still there. We still have a court decision that we don't know what's happening yet, unless it's come down while I've been on the House floor. There's still a question about that. So that's what my opinion on this question, and I hope that answers somewhat of your question, Superintendent.
I can't resist the urge to add in a little bit. And while not able to predict the future, perhaps I mistakenly think I'm a soothsayer. I try to measure the degree of certainty around it. So the number that I've had since we returned the end of April is $406 million that we are short with. It has not changed. So if there was a cut prior to that I didn't know about, it's possible. But I haven't seen that number change since I've been back. My biggest worry is looking forward. There's been a lot of discussion about a low to no ending balance, and Representative Dirks mentioned a couple of numbers that are very spongy of how much revenue there is. And the 60's already been cut to 44, and it was at 80, and who knows where. So anyway, if we have a zero ending balance, I fear the need for allotments has a very real possibility. If we have the need for allotments, I can't tell you what winds up with the cut. The reality is education has a very real chance of participating in that. So I would have greater confidence telling you there are no cuts. I don't think there are currently, and I don't think there's any intention of that. But to assure you through the year, the more solid my ending balance is able to be, the more confident I'd be to tell you we're good.
Actually, I have one more comment. When it comes to the governor's allocations, that's very irritating to me. It is our responsibility in the Senate and the House to put the budget together. And when he does those, and I personally have not been contacted ahead of time to hear what those are, and some that he did, I completely disagreed with. So if it does come to that, and the House and the Senate as a body cannot come to an agreement on our tax policy and where the financiers are going to go, I don't have control over the governor, and probably would not be happy with allocations that were assigned in areas that we'd spent a lot of time building a relationship and trying to assure schools, I'll name it, that we are looking at the best interest and trying to come up with something different that is more equitable and fair to the taxpayers, because right now it's really not. The way we divide up some of the funding was a number literally pulled out of the air. If you're above 81.2% in terms of your valuation, you don't get any money. If you're below that, you do. And so we have one school district in Kansas City that gets about $7 million because they're a poor school district. So there are some areas that we need to look at and balance out better, and actually do a formula that looks at outcomes and not so many inputs, because we really want students that are well-educated, ready to go to work in the workforce or go to college or go to technical school. So there's things that we need to make sure that we're measuring to allow us to make sure that our students are educated for today's needs in our workforce.
Another question?
I have a number of questions, and I'm trying to figure out kind of how to ask them. I want to say
One at a time,
thing.
Ann, one at a time.
Okay.
Okay.
I appreciate Representative Dirks and the work you do. But I have to say there's one comment that you made that seems reflective of the current legislature, and it said to the response to the Department of Corrections guy question he asked earlier, you said if the dollars are there, then it needs to be done. And that really seems backwards. We should be looking at what needs to be done and finding the dollars to do them. And Senator Arpke talked about looking at outcomes. So I'm curious if you're looking at outcomes on the schools, just in particular, our outcomes in the schools, we have really excellent schools in Kansas. So I wonder why you've decided that less money is needed in the schools since we had excellent outcomes already. Do you think that by lowering that number, the outcomes will be improved?
I don't know where you got less dollars. We have never spent less dollars ever. Well, Ann, I'd like you to show me, since the governor has been, hard figures, I can bring the Department of Education numbers and show you that we've had an increase every year since 2010. We did have, excuse me, let me finish. We did have a cut with Sabias and Parkinson. It was 2.3%. That dollar that we lost that year with that cut was made up with ARA funds. And this year, on K through 12 alone, we'll spend $6.2 billion. Last year it was 5.9. The year before that it was about 5.6. I don't agree with your surmise. We have not cut funding to public schools since I've been in the legislature. And if you'd like to have the Kansas Department of Education send you the numbers for your school district, they'd be happy to do that. Call up Dale Dennis. He will give you your school district. It's called Budget at a Glance. You can look at those figures all the way back to about 2003. They go back further than that, but not all schools did that. They're on the Kansas Department of Education website. They're under the U, not under B budget. They're under USD budget, and you can look up every single school district by district.
I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but just in visiting with the school superintendent, they look at it in a little different light. And I really can't think of the word here. I was thinking here. I rely on other sources other than just what the budget committee might have to say, because these school superintendents and teachers and those who educate our children, they're the ones that are out in the real world doing this every day. And they know what has to be done, what cuts are having to be made. Maybe they're not hiring a teacher this year. Maybe one of the social workers are not being called back next year. They are looking, they're looking at all sources. So there's a little conflict of interest in the numbers, and I'm not one to spout numbers. I'm not a number person as my colleague here on the left that could just tell me everything, but I'm not that way. I like to still refer to myself as being on the human side of politics. Numbers had never been really my forte, but I do make sure that I have them before I make a decision. And the volatility of our budget, our revenue streams at this point, we don't know if we're going to have adequate funding and if cuts have to be made. So unless you can foresee the future, I think we're going to have to do one day at a time.
I'm not sure I have anything to add on education. We've got two great minds that go deep on education. The limited information I would have, I've seen that the total numbers increase, but I know at least probably the largest part of that increase in most or perhaps all cases relates to the pension increase that's there. And I can't be as eloquent on the spendable dollars where that goes. As I look at it overall, I watch, I listen to the discussion. I'm not as central in the discussion, but figuring out where is the balance of what we want to do. I remember our previous superintendent had said, given the resources, everyone can learn. I believe that that is true. I'm not certain that resources are unlimited. I'm not certain that they're as limited as they currently are. But what is the balance that collectively we want to try to achieve? We do want to meet those needs. It does appear that needs are increasing. One of the things that I said, well, why does it cost more now than it did when I was in school? And it appears, one, and there are several, and I'll bet you guys can answer this question far better than I can, but through medical advances, we save more people from 9 seconds to 99 years of age. And those are some great benefits. But they may come at a great cost. And not only in our schools, but as we look across the system, are we prepared to handle that cost? I don't fully know the answer, but I don't know that we fully grappled with it. I think that those who have worked to meet the needs have worked ever so hard with the resources they have to continue to do all the things that we wish to do. I don't know if the resources, while they have increased across the board, I don't know that they've increased in lockstep with that. So, because I do depend on the data, I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is it will continue to be a collective struggle on all of those fronts to say, how do we choose to continue to live together? And it won't be easy discussions all of the time. But I appreciate all of you being part of that discussion, and I hope that everybody stays engaged in it.
Thank you. Another question?
Okay, you offered, Don, and so just as a follow-up to Ann's question and Senator Arpke, your response as well, and this is kind of a nice segue into, there's another piece that's still out there that no one's really talking about. The Shawnee County District 3 Judge Panel had hearings last week, and we're still waiting on where they stand on that. And you mentioned Dale Dennis. Dale Dennis, as a witness for the state in that hearing, testified that factoring out the CAPERS contributions, no district in the state of Kansas is getting additional money in the next 2 years. And he was very firm about that, and I thought that was interesting. So the question obviously is depending upon, there's so many legal maneuverings that have to happen, depending upon what the Shawnee County District 3 Judge Panel decides and then what the state decides to do, surely they'll appeal it, whether the Supreme Court decides to stay it or enforce it. If it goes that direction, is the legislature prepared to come back for a special session in June to address that issue?
Bill, I think that's a very relevant question, and I think the courts have been involved in the school finance formula since the 90s. And we've had many, many lawsuits, but the biggest one started in 2007 with the Montoy decision. And the state paid a significant amount of money, several millions of dollars, to have the Augenblick and Meyer report done, and the court cherry-picked that. And that was unfortunate because I think there were some efficiencies in there that we haven't realized. And that specific one I'm talking about is there should not be any school district less than 10,000 students. And if you look at some of our school districts that have more than one per county, and yet the total population would be fine to have one school district, so we could go from 283 to 105. But if we use their report, we'd have 56, 57 different school districts. And we already have school districts that are those sizes. Wichita has more than that. Kansas City definitely has more than that. I think you're the 7th largest school district, and you've got right at 7,000 students. So if you looked at Saline County and the other school districts that we have here, it'd be right at 10,000 students. So am I asking us to do consolidation and close schools? Absolutely not. I think those neighborhood schools are very important. However, could we do administrative consolidation? I think that's something that should be discussed. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I think we should look at it. And I think some of the things that we've done to help us take care of those issues of consolidation is, and I think they do a very good job, are our service centers. I've been to SDAC, I've been to Greenbush, and I've been to Smoky Hill. And I think the services that they provide by consolidating purchases for paper, IT contracts, janitorial supplies, training is a significant savings to our individual school districts. And I know that at SDAC, we have some schools that aren't prepared to pay for or can afford the HR function. So they do that. They do the payroll. They do the capers. They do the health care plans. So yes, I really think that we should have accepted all that report. We paid for it. But some of that has been forgotten in the issue of just talking about money. And sometimes I think we need to spend more time talking about how that benefits our students.
Well, it's very important that we have funding for schools, and if it would mean that we'd have to come back at whatever the courts decide, it would be our responsibility to find out what we need to do with it and honor that decision. Senator Arpke mentioned consolidation. I think we're always being compared to Johnson County. Pardon me. We're always being compared to Johnson County. Oftentimes they're on the House floor. Sometimes I believe they don't think that there's anything west of Salina, but there are. And there are a lot of my colleagues who represent those rural areas. And their idea is that consolidation, there are always rumors and rumblings in a more rural community of consolidating schools. Oftentimes, it's the distance of where kids have to travel to go to one school or another. And then we look at road conditions, winter weather. It could be a dangerous factor if you're having to sit on a school bus for an hour and a half or two to get to school. I mean, these kids, are sitting in a classroom, and then they have to get to school, and then they have to go back to school and go back home. I'm sure that that's not going to fall favorably on those people who represent those rural districts. And I think it would come to what kind of a bill, if any, that would ever come before the House. You're going to certainly have a division there between those who are more Johnson County type counties, with larger school districts, versus those who are in the rural schools, because their needs are different as far as transporting the kids and getting them home in a timely manner.
I'm not fond of our process of suing ourselves over the decisions, and I don't think any of us are. I'd love to find a different way to handle that. I believe our thing was set up, our government, so that those deliberations could be held in hearings and committees and policy set where policy is intent to be set. I am less willing to delegate it to the team of attorneys on each side to be responsible for fully vetting that information, although I would generally credit our judges of working very hard to have, from their perspective, as clear a solution from that data as they can get. Nonetheless, I think the committee hearing process where we genuinely listen is the best way to try and address that. So I have no idea what will come out of that. And then to being prepared to come back in June, the answer is no. So from me, I want to cut wheat. So anyway.
Okay, we are approaching the bewitching hour here. I'd like to take, ma'am, you had a follow-up question, did you not, on civil service? Why don't you go ahead and ask that? That will be our final question before our closing comments.
I don't think it was so much a question as it was. Yeah, Representative Johnson, I think, had a question. And I'm not sure. It seems like I'm getting blank looks when we're talking about this bill. The Senate voted to pass this bill the first week in May. And the House, of course, had passed it previously. Senator Arpke, Representative Johnson, and Representative Clays voted for the bill. I read this on the legislature's website that gives the history of the bills and the votes. And so it does several things, but the one that really concerns me most is the elimination of civil service protections for public servants. And the reason being, it's important to maintain public servants who are not doing their job for the state of Kansas based on political preferences.
Stephen or Diana?
What was, ma'am, what was the bill number again? Was it? Okay.
I will have to phone a friend.
It's showing here as being state employees shared leave program limited to life-threatening medical conditions. Longevity bonuses only if money is appropriated for such bonuses. Is that in? Yeah. But that's all it's showing here. I'll look it up.
No, I want to hold to our time frame because I promised our legislators we would get them out of here on time. They've got other commitments. So I'd like to go, Stephen, why don't we start with you with closing comments and.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you again to Don and Katie and everyone that's being here. I would welcome your continued input, particularly on the tax question that we had a chance to start discussing. One of the questions was, where does it go? I have some handle on the income tax side. On the sales tax side, the reality is I think there's going to be an element, and I'm curious if folks would just like the sales tax rate to swallow all of it. If you'd rather have it spread across other things, the other two things that have the most traction include cigarettes and gasoline and white diesel, so road fuel tax. Those two have some discussion about being increased either temporarily or permanently. And whether you would like one shot, just put it on sales tax and we all pay it, or if you like the menu option where it's spread over more things, how that best works. So I at least see one nod, which is helpful. Thanks for that, and I'll look forward to talking with you afterwards. Thank you for being here.
Truly enjoyed being here this afternoon, or this morning, I guess. You never know what time of day it is when you're sitting on the House floor. Thank you once again to AT&T and the Chamber for having us here today and being able to answer your questions. I would like to mimic Representative Johnson's comments that we really do need to have some input from you, our constituents. This is going to be a tough decision. There are going to be several versions, I'm sure, before we really come down to the last final one that we could possibly, hopefully agree on. But, the input from you is what we depend on because you are the ones who put us there. So please let us know. And if you would like my email address, I would be happy to give that to you. And I would love to have your emails because I do send out a newsletter. This one was pretty sparse. There wasn't a whole lot to comment on because most of it was generated towards the tax. But thank you once again for being here. You are the people who make up the community and coming out on a nice Saturday morning. Thank you once again.
Don, thank you for hosting us again. Katie, I'm glad to see you here. Thank you for AT&T sponsoring us. I'm sorry I couldn't answer that civil service question. I will look into that. It was not presented that way. So, and I don't know if it got put in another bill and the title was different, and because when we do amendments, sometimes the title does not actually reflect what the bill is. So I apologize for that. And I agree with both representatives here. It's really hard to do our job if we don't get feedback or input, especially on this tax issue. I can tell you on our tax committee, there was a slight revolt to the chairman. The cigarette tax got tabled. If you table that in committee, it's done. It doesn't ever come back. So for us, cigarettes are completely off the table at this point. So the alcohol tax increase, the gas tax, the sales tax, those are all still on the table. The permutations of those, 615, 65, 68, 71, we really need to find out what's palatable to you and if you want policy tied with that. In other words, no sales tax on food. So like I say, there's a lot of moving parts here and would appreciate if you'd let me know how you feel about that tax issue. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
Thank you, Senator Arpking, Representative Dirks, and Representative Johnson for being with us today. This is our third and final legislative issue meeting before they go back, and we'll have them again next year. So again, I know Tom, Diane, and Stephen, you have a really tough job, and we certainly applaud you for your efforts and what you're doing in the state legislature. And all you do for Salina, Saline County, and the state of Kansas. So thank you so much for taking time. I know you've got busy schedules. I think they'll hang around here for a little bit if anybody wants to talk to them. We do have another event in here, a graduation event, so there'll be people coming in and rearranging, so I'd appreciate your cooperation in trying to vacate the building as soon as possible. Katie, thank you for coming. We appreciate AT&T and their sponsorship. And thank you all for coming and taking the time to be with us today. We're adjourned. Thank you.